On a spring day in April 1814, cannon fire erupted off the east coast of Florida, near present-day Cape Canaveral. A British warship would end up battered, beaten, and captured. The battle lasted just 45 minutes, but would become one of the most decisive American naval victories of the War of 1812. Tensions between America and Great Britain continued long after the American Revolutionary War, which ended in 1783. Britain lost its 13 American colonies and was forced to cede numerous territories. This included ceding East and West Florida back to Spain. Britain had gained control of Spanish Florida after the French and Indian War. But during the Revolution, Spain allied with France and regained control of West Florida under command of General Bernardo de Galvez. America and Great Britain relied on one another for trade, but during the Napoleonic Wars, Britain issued trade restrictions to stop trade between America and France. Britain was also desperate for sailors. They began boarding American merchant ships, interrogating the crew, and claiming that many of the sailors were actually British citizens. These men were forced into the British Navy. The problem is most of these men were native-born American citizens or were legal British immigrants. America also claimed Britain was interfering with its expansion. They claimed that the British officials in Canada were aiding and arming Native Americans to stop Americans' expansion. But Britain weren't the only ones to blame. Some American warhawks wanted to annex some or all of British Canada. All of these issues brought the two countries closer to war. President James Madison laid out all of America's grievances to Congress. The House of Representatives and the Senate voted in favor of war. So on June 18, 1812, President Madison signed the Declaration into law. It would be the young nation's first formal declaration of war. The first shots of the war were fired on June 23, 1812, just 5 days after war was declared. The frigate USS President fired on HMS Belvidera. Both ships were damaged but survived. The war had officially begun. Florida was still controlled by Spain at the onset of war. Florida played an important but often overlooked role, even though it was not part of the United States or Great Britain. By the War of 1812, Florida was a loosely governed, sparsely populated backwater of New Spain. Because of this, Florida became a safe haven for British troops, American settlers, smugglers, privateers, and runaway slaves. Florida's location on the Gulf and Atlantic made it extremely valuable for both countries. British troops used Florida as a staging ground, supply area, and to arm Native American allies. Pensacola was occupied by British troops with permission from Spanish authorities. These actions caused General Andrew Jackson to act, most notably in the Battle of Pensacola, when General Jackson led 4,000 U.S. troops to Pensacola. The Georgia and Florida border also saw tension. Many Americans living near the St. Mary's River believed that Florida should belong to the United States. This led to the Patriot War of 1812. Georgia militia, with help from U.S. gunboats, marched deep into Spanish territory. They occupied large areas of Spanish Florida. Around the same time, Florida's coastline became entangled in the Greater War of 1812. Numerous warships patrolled the waters to control the Atlantic shipping routes. The USS Peacock was one of 3 heavy sloops of war designed by William Doughty. She was ordered on March 3, 1813, after being authorized by Congress. Her keel was laid down at the New York Navy Yard on July 9, 1813. She was launched on September 19th. The Peacock was 119 feet long, 31.6 feet wide, and she had a burthen of 509 tons. Her armaments were 20 32-pounder carronades and 2 12-pounder bow chasers, with a crew of 140 officers and men. She was named after the HMS Peacock, which was defeated and sank earlier that year by USS Hornet. Lewis Warrington was promoted to Master Commandant and given command of USS Peacock. The HMS Epervier was a British cruiser-class brig-sloop ordered on May 6, 1812, and built by the famous British shipbuilder Miss Mary Ross. It was launched on December 2, 1812. She was 100 feet 5 inches long, 30 feet 8.5 inches wide, with a burthen of 389 tons. Her armaments were 2 6-pounder bow guns and 16 32-pounder carronades. She was commissioned on January 1813 under the command of Richard Walter Wales. She had a successful start in the War of 1812. She captured the schooner Lively on August 20th, 1813. On September 20th, she captured the Active. On the 23rd, along with the Majestic and Wasp, she captured the Resolution. On October 5th, she captured the privateer ship Portsmouth Packet. On November 3rd, she captured the merchant ship Peggy. She captured the American privateer Alfred on February 23, 1814. By the spring of 1814, the War of 1812 was nearing its second year. Napoleon abdicated in April of 1814 and was exiled to Elba Island off the coast of Italy. Britain could now turn its full attention to the United States. While land battles and naval battles were being fought to the north, the U.S. also had ships patrolling the Atlantic shipping routes to try and disrupt British trade and engage with British warships. The War of 1812 is known for its many naval battles on the Great Lakes, but the Atlantic played a crucial role. On March 12, 1814, USS Peacock left port in New York with supplies destined for St. Mary's, Georgia. She successfully evaded the British blockade and headed south. She was supposed to join with the USS President, but President could not get out of New York because of the blockade. Master Commandant Lewis Warrington chose to patrol the Bahamas while he waited, searching for British merchant ships. On April 14th, HMS Epervier left Port Royal, Jamaica, headed for Havana. She was loaded with spices and sailed out of Havana Harbor on April 25, 1814. She was with a small convoy. Her crew had problems in the past, most recently after the capture of the privateer Alfred. Crew members were conspiring with the captured Americans to take over the ship and make a break for the United States. Commander Wales was worried about his crew, but he was forced to continue by his superiors. On the morning of April 28th, USS Peacock was patrolling the waters off of Cape Canaveral when sails were spotted off in the distance. Peacock engaged. Once the British convoy noticed the American sloop-of-war, the merchant ships sailed away as fast as they could, but HMS Epervier turned to engage. She was outgunned and had a smaller ship. she had 16 32-pounder carronades and two 18-pounder carronade bow chasers. Peacock had 32-pounder carronades and two 12-pounder bow chasers. The two warships raced towards one another. Both ships faced starboard to starboard, aiming high at one another's riggings. As shots rang out, both ships were damaged. Epervier turned and sailed parallel to Peacock. They engaged once again. The sound of carronades filled the air. Wooden splinters flew back at the men. Peacock lowered her cannons and aimed directly at her opponent's hull. USS Peacock suffered no damage after the initial broadside, but Epervier was heavily damaged, and the British cannon fire slowed. Commander Wales called for boarding parties to board the Peacock and capture the ship, but his crew refused. The same crew that he was told not to worry about by his commanding officers. At 11:05 a.m., the battle had raged for 40 minutes. The British brig-sloop had 5 feet of water flooding the hold and had been hit 45 times by cannon fire. With a crew unwilling to put up a fight, Commander Wales lowered the flag, striking the colors. The British surrendered. The British losses were 8 killed and 15 wounded. The American losses were 0 killed, 2 wounded. The crew of the Peacock repaired the rigging within an hour. Peacock's first lieutenant took command of Epervier and prevented her from sinking. Repairs were completed and she was ready to sail by nightfall. Both ships under American command sailed up the Florida coast. Commander Wales reported disaffection and unrest among the crew. The court-martial stated that Epervier had the worst crew of any vessel on her station. On December 24, 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, and the War of 1812 officially ended on February 17, 1815. All occupied territories were returned, and the pre-war boundaries between the United States and Canada. The war ended with no real winner. There were no territorial gains, and the conflict had been overshadowed by larger conflicts like the Revolutionary War and American Civil War. The capture of Mobile was the only permanent territorial acquisition the U.S. made during the conflict. Mobile was part of Spanish Florida. The War of 1812 was the foundation which led to the First Seminole War and American control of Florida. An estimated 15,000 American soldiers, 10,000 British and Canadian soldiers, and 10,000 Native Americans and civilians died in the War of 1812. The war saw the burning of the Canadian capital at York, modern-day Toronto, including the burning of the White House, which was constructed between 1792 to 1800. Only the exterior sandstone walls remain from the original structure. I want to thank y'all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.